You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 255 of Meet the Farmers. If you are harvesting at the moment, I hope that everything's going well. Today on the show, we are delving back into the archive once again. I've got two episodes for you, starting with Amanda Owen, who I spoke to for episode 174 in October 2022. My guest today, in reality, needs very, very little introduction, as she is probably one of, if not the most recognised farmers in the UK, having appeared on most of the main TV channels in series like The Dales and Our Yorkshire Farm, which has become one of Channel 5's most popular programmes, attracting over 3 million viewers. Yes, I am thrilled today to have Amanda Owen with me. Amanda grew up in Huddersfield, but was inspired largely by the James Herriot books, amongst others, to follow a farming life. She would eventually settle at Ravenseat in Swaledale in the Yorkshire Dales, but before that, she worked on all sorts of farms as a freelance shepherdess, a relief milker, and even, for a time, an alpaca shearer, and you don't get many of those. In fact, if there are any alpaca shearers listening, please do get in touch because I would love to hear from you. She writes about those early experiences of farming in her first book, The Yorkshire Shepherdess. And I absolutely love the way that she tells those stories because anyone, and I include myself here, who has worked on different farms with different ways of doing things will be able to relate to much of what she writes about there. Different farmers definitely have different views on how they want things done. Ravenseat, the farm that she calls home, is a 2,000-acre hill farm right at the top of Swaledale, with around 800 Swaledale ewes and 30 head of cattle. Amanda also has 9 children to look after between the ages of 5 and 21. As well as her television career, she's written 5 books, including the book that we're going to talk about today, Celebrating the Seasons, of which the new paperback version has just come out. Amanda, welcome to Meet the Farmers. Thanks for coming on. How's your week going? How are things?
Well, it's been quite varied. I mean, I feel like sometimes I've got a welly-clad foot in 2 different worlds. I mean, basically, yeah. I've just come in from washing sheep. We've got
You're soaked as well.
I'm absolutely soaked. Literally, I've just hung my trousers up in front of the fire. So I'm so glad that you can only see the top half of me because I've got a pair of shorts on at the moment. So yeah, we have a pair of steaming leggings hanging up there. It's I mean, things are busy. Things are busy at the moment, you know, and I'm sort of always dodging about between doing this and that. So yeah. Today, washing sheep. Yesterday, I was actually at a literature festival on Guernsey talking about washing sheep. So, you know, it's a varied split, should we say?
Yeah, and as well, I'm sure we'll talk about later on. It's part of the part of the variety of life, and it's part of the variety of farming life as well, with some other things that you did. A lot of other farmers might not do. But I want to start with books because. And you're probably going to get embarrassed when I say this, but I think you are a fabulously engaging writer. And actually, I was in Amsterdam last week, and I went on the ferry for the first time from Harwich to the Hook, which took forever. But when I was doing that, I reread your first book, and as I mentioned, I really enjoyed those sort of early farming experiences that you mentioned in that. But what did books mean to you growing up? And what do they mean to you now? Mm-hmm. Have you always been a reader, and what do you enjoy reading?
I was always a reader. I was never, as a child, particularly academic, not at all. I was the kid who stared out of the window. I was always the daydreamer. I was the child that nobody ever remembered at school because I was never particularly good, but I was never particularly bad. I was just kind of invisible.
Yeah,
I just kept my head down and sort of daydreamed. And then, of course, you can't keep daydreaming because at some point when you're somewhere in a region about 14 or 15, a careers advisor comes along and says, you know, hey, Amanda, what do you want to do with the rest of your life?
Yeah.
And that's the wake-up call. And you're like, well, I don't know. What do I actually like doing? What do I enjoy? Well, I enjoyed reading. And of course, the James Herriot books, which had been absolutely huge, in the 80s. I'd read those. I'd also watched the television series, All Creatures Great and Small. And all I could think of to suggest to my careers advisor was, I said, look, I'd really like to be a vet, a countryside vet. Well, I mean, that was pie in the sky. It absolutely was. Because, I mean, obviously, any child that wants to become a vet has to be pretty academic. You're looking at straight A's and all the rest of it. So he was very matter of fact, was my careers advisor. And he said, look, Amanda, no, you're not, you haven't got the right credentials for that. You need to go away and think again. So I didn't entirely give up, but I went back to the bookshelves because that was where I went. I hung about in the library. I was a school librarian. I just was a reader, but I was always reading. I always had a focus, I suppose, on non-fiction. I liked sort of factual kind of stuff. And the Herriots for me were kind of a bit of I suppose you'd have to say, a bit of fiction mixed with non-fiction. But to me, they were absolutely real. It was about the characters of people. So went back to the bookshelves, found myself another book. I'm looking on my shelf now because I've got a copy of it.
Have you still got it?
Yeah, of course I have.
Oh, great.
It's there somewhere. There's all kinds of epic terms on there. It was called Hill Shepherd.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't exactly a sequel. That was about. But it was a coffee table style book. So it's full of photographs. And these were very they were very graphic photographs of shepherds going about the business. It was called Hill Shepherd. So it was following the lives of shepherds in the Dales and in the Lake District. And these pictures, I mean, they were so gritty. I mean, it just showed the blood, the mud, everything. And for me, picking that book up as a child, living a relatively suburban sort of life, I couldn't believe that was still going on, really. Yeah. I was in Yorkshire. As the crow flies, probably, it was only a life that was going on 100 miles away from where I was living.
Yep.
But it could have been a different planet. And, where I actually lived, although it was very urban, the draw that I always had was I loved going on my bicycle out onto the moors and the sort of the open areas. So when I got that book, it was kind of like something being switched on in my head. And I thought, you know what? Being a shepherd is a thing. I could be a shepherd. Maybe that would sort of tick all the boxes for what I felt like I wanted to do. I felt like I wanted to work outside. I felt like I wanted to work with animals. That sounds so sort of fashionable. I want to work with animals. So many people do that. But it was farming.
Exactly.
And for me to say I want to be a farmer that was pie in the sky. So for me to be a shepherd sort of ticked all the right boxes. And I think now, probably in hindsight, I was probably rebelling as well. I was probably trying to sort of upset everybody by trying to do something different, as you do when you're a teenager.
Yeah. This is going a little bit off, but do you speak to young people, kids from urban areas? Do you come across anyone who sort of has that dream that you saw in yourself when you were a kid?
A lot. Maybe it's spoken about even more than it was in my day. In my day, I feel like, some things haven't changed. In the tried and tested way to supposedly get anywhere is, of course, sort of college, university, all the rest of it. And I would hope that there might be a bit of a sort of awakening that isn't the route for all children, and it isn't always the route to success. Yeah. So when I talk to kids now, and literally at Guernsey yesterday at the Literature Festival, there was a procession of children there. So I'm wearing the jumpers with the tractors on, and there was a lad there who had a couple of pigs, and there was another lad who was working part-time on one of the 3 dairy farms they had on Guernsey. Okay. There are a lot of children out there who are very enthusiastic. They have seen television programs about the countryside. They've seen it through social media, and have decided that they want to work the land. And I will encourage them every step of the way, because no matter what the political climate, no matter what sort of fads and fashions come and go, there is one thing that is never going to fall out of fashion, and that is feeding people. It might change, ideas might change, but the bottom line is that the countryside, nature and food on the plate is always going to be relevant. It can't not be. So why not encourage a younger generation? Absolutely.
Yeah. Just going back to books again a bit. Did you write at all when you were younger? And did you ever imagine that you'd end up writing 5 books and who knows, maybe more in the future?
No, I got an E in English at GCSE level. Wuthering Heights, sort of Cider with Rosie, all that kind of stuff. It just wasn't for me. I wasn't interested.
Yeah.
And through my kids now, I see exactly the same. My oldest is 21. She's just got a first in biomedicine. She's very academic. She's very, very studious. That's what she loves. Ruben, he's 18. He would not tolerate any sort of academia. He hated going to school. He was a good boy, don't get me wrong, but he just hated school. He didn't want to learn about geography. He didn't want to learn about history. All he wanted to do was work with machinery and engines. That's how he's wired. That's how his brain is. Okay. But you know what? He's away working today. He works every hour that there is. And he is busy because he's astute. He's clever. He's smart. He's got a business brain. But he isn't going to the university. He's going to the University of Life. But the point being, for a child like Ruben, it's very difficult to rail against the system.
Yep.
If you live rural, you have options. With Ruben, I always think that if he'd have lived my life when he got to 14, he probably would have bunked off. He probably wouldn't have gone to school because he'd have found other things to distract him. Because he lives rurally, he has to be on the school bus. He had to go into school every day. There was no, school's nearly 30 miles away. So there was no way he could dodge that one. But also, if you live on a farm, if you live rurally, there are ways that you can be creative. You can get cars. You can work on engines. You can work with machinery. You can be out in the fields. You can do things. If you're a child who lives in a city, you don't have that. You don't have that privilege. Yep. So it is really difficult. I've never sort of been one to sort of stand on a soapbox and say, this is how you should parent. This is how you should bring kids up. Because actually, like I say, we're fortunate that we have this. So I just feel like it needs to be a bit of a change in mindset in the whole education system and the kind of sort of how we want kids to be. We have to always be looking to the next generation and be able to give them that ability to be creative and go their own way, I suppose.
Oh, that's such a great point made. Tell us about your most recent book, Celebrating the Seasons, because in essence, it's part recipe book, part memoir, and it includes a lot of your own photography as well. Why did you want to write this particular book, and how did you find the experience of putting it together? I always love asking writers that question.
Putting books together for me is just like, it's so difficult because I'm always distracted, always, because this is the element that is really difficult. In order to have material to write about, you can't stop doing it. There are only a certain number of hours in a day, so you have to spread yourself incredibly thinly. I'm very aware that, ridiculous as it might sound and unfair as it absolutely is, there is more money to be made talking about shoveling the proverbial than actually shoveling it.
Yeah.
And please do not think that I think that is a good thing, because it absolutely isn't. But as somebody on a hill farm, that's the reality. As somebody on a hill farm with 9 children, you have to, obviously, if you go back to the bare bones of it, you have to look at how you sort of future-proof things. How do you make it work?
Yeah.
Now, the problem is, it's okay writing about it, but you do have to keep doing it. So that is why I literally lurch from one extreme to the other. But it's that challenge of doing that I enjoy. But putting together a book, what you talked about with the photography, obviously, I don't have time to write a diary to remind me of things, obviously. But what I do have is a phone in my pocket that nobody ever rings because there's no signal here, so that's good.
That must be beautiful.
Perfect. But I take pictures. It's a visual diary.
Yeah.
I think at the moment I've got about 130,000 pictures in the back catalogue.
Wow.
So that is everything. I mean, this morning it's pictures of us washing the gimmers and shifting them across the bridge. It's literally, it's little pointers. I can look back at those pictures and it can take me through whatever was happening on any given day, probably for about last decade.
Fantastic.
And as is always the case with me, I need deadlines. If I sat down and wrote something, I probably wouldn't send it. I would leave it still until the deadline because I keep changing it.
Exactly.
So actually what I do is I know myself and I know my sort of little funny ways. I just leave it. And yes, that is horrible stress. But that horrible stress means that I get one shot at it. That's it. Can't go back into it. Can't change it. Can't alter it. I press send. It's gone. That's how it has to be. And it's usually press send about an hour before there is someone absolutely threatening me. Yeah. Because that's just how I am. I've just got 1,000 distractions, right?
Exactly. We all have to learn how we all work. You mentioned Hill Shepherd before, John Eliza Forge's book, which was in essence written as a lasting tribute to a very traditional way of life, and this book as well, Celebrating the Seasons. It's also a celebration of that in many ways. Do you think that that's partly why? And when I was putting these questions together, I was thinking about how to word this one, is why people are so fascinated by your story and your story there representing a story that lots of hill farmers all over the country live. But is there a fascination with that?
Yeah, absolutely there is. Maybe a newfound fascination. I used to think that the people who watched the programs or read the books, I used to think it was all a nostalgia for times past, for times gone.
Yeah.
People recalling their own childhoods, where they were brought up. I feel like maybe we're getting into the area of being two generations from people working the land. Possibly we're about that stage. It makes me feel very old. But people still had that connection whereby they remembered, their grandparents maybe farming, small holding, more of a subsistence style farming, more of a connection with naturally the harvest and what the land could provide. We certainly have moved away from that. But now, and I think particularly after the pandemic, I'm hoping these lessons are sort of retained actually, and people don't go back to forgetting about what the countryside can provide from us and what it can give to us. But when we had 2 years of utter chaos, that was people being trapped in their own house with no access to the outside, the great outdoors, when we had people heading into the supermarkets because there was panic buying, food shortages. I thought to myself, maybe this is a reset, because of course also people were picking up skills that they thought they'd forgotten. Everybody was bread making, everybody was baking cakes, everybody was sort of taking a step back. All those skills, everyone was like, young'uns these days, they can't cook, they can't bake, they can't do this. Oh, they could. Of course they could. It's just life didn't allow it because we were so busy. I just hope that we don't sort of slip back into our old ways. And I feel like the crisis that we're going through at the moment, I don't know, life's difficult. And I think for a younger generation, obviously we all have to pay the bills, but I think there was a time that we went through, particularly post-COVID, that a lot of the fan base were people who literally wanted to change their life. They wanted to take the emphasis away from the rat race, and they wanted to look at living close to the land and letting their kids experience the fresh air and all the rest of it. Whether life at the moment allows for that, it's another thing.
I think it's super.
Because of course, we're going through a big crisis at the moment that no one could ever have anticipated. But I guess the thing that it's taught me, I suppose, is that you can't ever sort of rest on your laurels. You can't ever sit there and think, well, I've got it made, sorted. I know what I'm doing. For 10, 15 years, the emphasis on farming and farmers has always been stop farming, diversify, quit farming. Well, not quit farming, but let the farming sort of be in the background.
Yeah. You've got your farming, but then you've actually got your business where you're going to make your money on whatever that is.
Yeah, exactly. Let's diversify. Get yourself a campsite, look after, do tourism, campsites, farm shop.
Horses, and it's fine because you've got loads of time to do all that. You can get all that done. Yeah,
absolutely. But farmers by nature can turn their hand to so many things. That is the nature of farming. You have to be a bit of a plumber, a bit of an electrician, a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of a builder.
Yeah,
you name it. So we implement these things. In fact, maybe our problem has been that we are almost too good at sort of wearing different clothes, and we would have been better just saying, you know what, we're farmers, that's what we're good at, we're going to keep putting food on plates. Anyway, we sort of take the nod. It's not particularly about food production. What are we, 60% self-sufficient? Apparently that was good enough.
Yeah.
But anybody who'd thrown all the sort of everything that they had into tourism was completely snookered when COVID came, because that was the end of that. And what was everybody wanting during COVID? They were back to the shelves. Were they wanting tofu? No. Were they wanting edamame beans? No. What did you want? You couldn't buy sausages. You couldn't buy chicken, eggs, yeast, flour. It was like, come on, guys, get your fingers out. We need you farming again.
Yeah.
We need you to be super productive. Forget tourism. Everyone's at home. You're not making any money that way. So that was kind of the wake-up call of saying, well, you know what? Actually, anybody who sort of was doing a bit of this and a bit of that could ride out the storm. It's about, I think, striking a balance and sort of not actually fully committing on everything. It's kind of like just literally sort of, we do a bit of tourism, we do a bit of media, we do farming, we do all that. Yeah. We do the environment, we do the flowers, we do the birds.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that you can work it.
Yeah. Because you've got 24 hours in every day. And
it's so volatile. It's so volatile. I mean, you once used to think, 25 years ago, I used to stand on the hill end at Ravensseat and think, I am so far away from everybody and everything. I can lose myself here. I'm very insignificant. What goes on in the world don't matter to me. Whew, are you kidding? It's crazy. Connection is great. Being able to be sort of connected to the world via the internet, getting the internet into the farm, has obviously impacted hugely in what we can do. You know, I could never have done the books, never have done the writing. You know, a lot of business now is conducted via the internet. So that is wonderful. But the world has certainly got smaller, and farming, certainly at the moment, there's a lot of farmers out there who are looking for clarity, and I don't think we're ever really going to get it because government policy just turns on a sixpence. What you're told one week can vary hugely to another week, and how can you plan for that?
Yeah,
so difficult.
Tell us about Swaledales and what make them so distinctive, because I don't think we've talked about them on the podcast before.
Swaledales. Well, I mean, it's all anyone can speak about at the moment. We're coming up to that time. Swaledale mania has hit Swaledale. I mean, obviously Swaledales are from Swaledale. It's where they belong. It's where they've always been. It's where the sort of breed was born. Yes, I've washed 39 of them this morning, and also plucked around the eyes to try and make them look more beautiful. But I don't know whether there's going to be any trade on Saturday. You know, round here it's all about breeding pure. They're hoofed flocks, and the Swaledale is perfectly at home here. It's a hardy sheep. It's a very natural sheep. You know, we don't dock them. They're a horned breed. There is no other sheep around here. If you go to a sheep show around here, I'm afraid there's not going to be any other breed class. It's Swaledales, and people say, well, how can that even be? Go to Tanhill Show, go to Muka Show, and literally it will take from 10 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening to go through all the classes, which are generally one Swaledale yow, two Swaledale yows, one local yow, one large breeder yow, one small yow, pair of gimmers, tups, you name it. There is every single class. But of course, tomorrow the sale we have is shot gimmers, so that's female lambs that people will buy as breeders and replacements. I don't know whether there's going to be a trade or not. We'll lay it in. And then, of course, we've got the tup sales. We're closed flocks, so a lot of the flocks around here, the only blood they will buy in will be a tup at the tup sales. Yeah. So it's critically important that you buy well, because if you buy badly, obviously that will impact you down the line for many years to come. So there'll be some big money, there'll be some low money. Average price of a tup will probably end up being something like £300. Some of them will make crazy money. Some of them will make a lot less. But it's kind of like a gamble. And you know, the sheep come with the farms around here.
And if you want to hear the rest of that episode, head back to episode 174. Next up, we are heading back to November 2020 and episode 96, when I spoke to Cambridgeshire farmer Tom Clarke. This evening, I am heading to the Cambridgeshire Fens near Ely to speak to arable farmer Tom Clarke, who farms approximately 1,000 acres of milling wheat, sugar beet, potatoes, and other crops, including linseed. Tom is the fourth generation of his family to farm in the area, as we'll see tonight. He had a career away from farming first, before throwing himself in wholeheartedly to agriculture. On top of the farm itself, he sits on his local internal drainage boards. He's on the NFU Sugar Board, and he also sits on the NFU's 2040 Net Zero Steering Group. Along with 22 of his other neighbours, he's also part of the Ely Nature Friendly Farming Zone, which seeks to share knowledge about farming alongside supporting wildlife and informing the public about that work. Tom, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for even wanting me on. I'm very privileged. Thank you.
Not
You've done
at
your
all.
research as well. I'm really worried now. You know everything. I should be asking you the questions.
I have to say, it's amazing what the internet can delve up. Don't worry though. Can you start by telling us a bit about your part of the Fens? How would you sell the area if you were the local tourist board?
Wow. I wouldn't start off very well, because I would say it's really flat, and you know, a lot of people drive through it and don't look sideways and just have the impression that it's all flat and boring, and you know, it's quite man-made landscape. It's all 2 meters below sea level. Yep. It's very flat, as I say, and it's pretty. I guess if you're expecting your average pudding bowl hills and sort of bucolic fantasy of farming, then this is about as far away from that as you can get. But then there is a big but. I think there's a really strong beauty. If you like horizontal, we've got loads of horizontal. There's nothing in the way. You get massive big skies. Yeah. You get light coming in from actually our village, where the farm is all around the village. And there's an awful lot of artists who have actually moved here. Yep. Because apparently the light is fantastic for painting, and there is beauty in that flat, boring landscape. So don't let you tell anybody different.
So you're a fourth generation farmer, but I know that you didn't go into farming straight away. So I'm interested to know, did you want to be a farmer when you were growing up?
It's a trick. People always ask me this question. And yes, my dad was a farmer, and his dad had been farmers. But we didn't grow up on the farm. As I say, the fen is all old bog, old marsh, and it's not very stable. And when my great-grandfather and mother started the farm, the house that they lived on the farm fell down.
Wow.
And they decided, you know, let's not try that again. And they bought a house in Ely, in the town nearby to the farm, so 4 miles away. And that has been, if you like, the farmhouse. And so that's where I grew up. That's where I have always lived before I moved out of home. And my mum didn't farm. My mum wasn't a farmer's wife. She actually ran a ladies' underwear shop.
Okay.
in the city, in town, Ely. And no one ever asked me, you know, oh, when you were growing up, did you want to run an underwear shop?
I can say, could we talk about that instead?
I'm not sure I've got a lot. I mean, I spent some of my formative years looking at ladies' underwear, but I'm not sure it's broadcastable particularly. But so no, I mean, so I was. It's a great privilege in a way, because I was given the opportunity of a blank sheet of paper. It wasn't. It's quite a large farm for where we farm, and Dad had, you know, I think when I was growing up there was about 15, 16 people working on the farm, and he was managing it, if you like, and he didn't need us there every day to help out. It wasn't like a small family farm. My dad was a farmer, just like my friends at schools. Dads were doctors or accountants or policemen or whatever, and yeah, so it wasn't in my blood in that way, certainly to start with. And my dad certainly didn't at the time say that he really, was expecting us to do the same. He wanted us to do what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
I think he'd been slightly forced into it, and he just didn't want to, make us feel like we had to.
Okay. Let's take a bit of a sidestep and talk about your soils, because as we've alluded to at the beginning, you've got good peaty, silty boys' land soils.
Girls' land.
Or girls' land. Or girls' land. Which listeners in other parts of the country probably drool over. However, I'm assuming you also have erosion risk. Tell me about the benefits and the drawbacks of fenland soil.
So we are farming in what they call the black fens. So the fens is divided into two sections. The northern part up by the Wash is much more silty.
Okay.
And it's had marine deposition on it and sediment from the rivers and stuff. And that's really fertile too. But down in the south of the fens where we are, it's black. And it's black because it's grown from when the fens were flooded with sphagnum moss and sedges and things like that. And it's almost pure organic matter. All our soils are about 30% organic matter, carbon. And they're deep. They're not as deep as they were, which we'll probably get onto, but they're deep. That you can dig 2 or 3 foot down before you hit anything that isn't as black as coal dust. And it's flat, as I said before. It's drained out. It's completely pancake flat. So we don't have any slopes anywhere on the farm, really, apart from the sides of the ditches. So all the fields are separated not by hedges or banks or anything, but by ditches. And it's all underdrained and as you say, so it gives us a lot of options. We can grow pretty much anything, including a lot of weeds. So one of the things that makes the soil so black is the amount of weed seeds just sitting there waiting to grow. Yeah. So that is a slight drawback from having such good soils. There's got to be some balance there. Yeah. And as you say, when it gets dry as well, the wind can blow the soil, and it does blow away. I've heard people say sand blows away, but you wait till you see, fine peat blowing away. It's like a black sandstorm. Wow. So we take measures. We make sure that doesn't happen on our land. Not everyone around here does the same, and that is a huge issue. The other problem with such high organic matters, they're really good for buffering the soil and everything. They lack manganese, so we have to use a lot of manganese for the plants. The organic matter, so you'll read on if you've done your basis or whatever, and you read on herbicide labels or whatever, don't apply on organic, binds to organic matter. So we can't use residuals. So if you're thinking, you've just got your wheat and just bung on the pre-em or whatever, we don't use pre-ems. We can't use pre-ems. We only use contact plant protection products. So that does limit what we can grow as well. But these are small things, because you're right. We as I was saying to you before we started, we haven't finished drilling yet. It's middle of November now. And that's quite usual for us. We can carry on drilling right through to February. We don't. Sometimes it's a bit of a mess, but again, the soil is very forgiving. We can get away with murder, really.
Let's talk about your cropping. So you grow wheat, sugar beet, linseed, and you've got a joint venture potato operation with a neighbour. Has that always been your cropping selection?
More or less, yeah. It hasn't really changed a great deal. I think back in the olden days, my family, we were much more into market gardening around here. So it was a lot more asparagus and fen celery is quite a famous thing. It used to be. So, but since the war, it's been roughly 50% wheat, and that's kind of like the break crop between the other things we grow. So a lot of the money used to be in potatoes and carrots and sugar beet, root crops like that. So that's really what we've done, and we haven't changed massively. I did drop peas a while ago, but and brought on linseed, but generally that's hasn't changed massively.
Who does what on the farm? Because I know you employ one full-time tractor driver and tractor and telehandler operator, and a spray guy. and you're in charge of general operations. I mean, how big is the team?
It's a euphemism if ever I've heard one.
Not at all.
This is my office. I can maybe
This
be
is
found
where
behind
you
my
live.
Desk. Yes. Yeah. No,
Listeners,
so
he hasn't left in 2 years.
So I don't do a lot of tractor work, obviously. I never really learned how to drive a tractor. And when I first started on the farm, I made an effort. I did a little course and had to hitch trailers up and everything. I tried reversing trailers and pretty much very quick. I mean, as we'll probably talk about, I took over quite suddenly on the farm, and the guys who have been here for years. And I tried reversing a trailer into a barn, and it was probably one of the most humiliating experiences of my whole life.
Life is about knowing what your skill set is and doing it well.
That is the key. So I don't do an awful lot of tractor work, and I can fill in if needed. But if that happens, that means something usually has gone wrong somewhere else. Okay. It's quite a desperate measure if I have to get into a tractor. So I've got 2 full-timers, and we split the tractor work between them. I've got I used to have 3, but the guy still lives on the farm. He's now a caretaker. He's always a hand. He's got the brain, he's got the experience. Yeah. I call him a caretaker, but really I'm using him for his brain, his memories and his knowledge of what he's done on the farm before. And I have a bookkeeper who comes in and helps with the office work. And that's it, really. Okay. I don't have a farm manager. I don't have a foreman or anything like that. So all the planning, all the day-to-day working out what we're going to do, where it's going to go, what's the priority, if something goes wrong, what do we do instead? That's all me. Yep. And all the marketing and all the selling and crop choices and that's all me. I have an agronomist, an independent agronomist he's older than me, but he's been on the farm since he was 23.
Oh wow!
Okay. I think. And so when I first started, he was an absolute boon because he just knew the history of every field, what the weed problems were, which I knew nothing about. Yep. So for about 5 or 6 years, I just followed him around like a little puppy every time he came to the farm, just soaking up all that sort of knowledge. And I never studied agriculture myself. I'd never been to agricultural college, and as I said, I didn't do a lot of it when I was growing up. So that was really what I learned about farming, is from the guys on the farm and from my agronomist and from obsessive reading and talking to neighbours and things like that.
Let's go back to your earlier pre-farming life. So you did a degree in economics and politics, and then you spent 4 years working across local government, media relations and policy making. Tell me about that time and what drew you to London in the first place.
Gosh, you've really done your research. I don't talk about this much.
It's all on your site. It's all on your website.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Well, it's all true. So yeah. So I did. I was very out of university. I mean, I did well at school. So university seemed like an obvious choice. And it was quite a toss-up at the time as to whether I did economics degree or a biology degree.
Okay.
And I thought economics was probably more useful. I mean, I was equally interested in both, and they're quite different ways to go. So then I got a place at University of Exeter, and I did my economics and politics degree. And the politics was really quite a new thing because I hadn't studied that at school. That was really very interesting. And I sort of, the common thing between biology and economics and politics, they're both about how the world works, what makes it tick. Yeah. And I guess that's where I was always coming from. And then having learned all the theory, you want to go out and put it into practice. But I spent 4 years of my life working in local government in London. It was just where I got a job. And I was a policy advisor, researcher, and I did media relations for a local council group, local in Kingston upon Thames, so in the southwest of London. Yep. And it was very interesting. Well, I'm getting carried away, but it might not be interesting to everyone. It was a very interesting situation in that that council was what they call the hung council. So there was no political group. It was Lib Democrats, Labour and Conservatives, and none of them had a majority. Yep. So it was all very febrile and very political, and it was all about trying to work out what was going to work and what wasn't going to work, and communicating all of the intricate machinations in a way that the public could understand about what was going on. And I found that fascinating and totally absorbing. And by the end of 3 or 4 years, I'd realized I enjoyed it, but I didn't want that to be my whole life. So I knew that it was the time to take a decision to do something more. Because quite easily, that could have been a career path for me. I would have ended up being some sort of SPAD or something in the end. I looked ahead and I didn't want that for myself. So I took a left turn and I went to business school.
Ah, so that's when you did your MBA. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So I did it straight after. Well, so I've been about 4 or 5 years in that area, and I've done some work with newspapers as well. I've done a work experience, journalism, and things like that. So that took me then to MBA. I thought, well, if politics isn't where everything works from, and it's just a lot of infighting, bickering, point scoring, then maybe business, the world of business, and actually, that's how you change things in the world. That's how you understand how things work. So I went to business school in the UK and actually in the States as well. I was in North Carolina for a while at Duke University. And again, that was absolutely fascinating. Really learned a lot about the world and about what makes business tick, why business works, how it doesn't work, what they're trying to do to kid consumers to do stuff, and learning the difference between value creating businesses and value destroying businesses, and strategy and negotiation and all that sort of stuff. So from the MBA, I went off and decided, right, okay, I'm going to fix companies and organizations. I'm going to be a management consultant and basically be an organizational doctor. You go in and you work out what's not working or what's not right, if it's not going in the right direction, and you put together a plan to fix it. So I did that for about another 4 years, several different places. And I worked also with government then as well, because I had a background in local government. So sometimes I did consulting projects in Whitehall and in the third sector for charities as well, which was really interesting and good. And then my dear old dad, who'd been plugging away on the farm all that time, got diagnosed with cancer, and he died within 6 months. So then it was a decision about, well, what do I do then? My sister was doing a PhD and she was living in New Zealand. So it was really down to me to pick up the pieces, and I did. Some people say, well, why don't you just sell the farm? Maybe in retrospect, that would have been a good idea.
Yeah.
But I decided to do the opposite and just learn to be a farmer without any experience.
I mean, if it's okay, can we go back to that time and just paint a picture of what was going through your mind in terms of the farm, but also personally? I think were you around 30, 32, 33 then?
Yes, 33 years old, and just moved in. My girlfriend and I had just moved in together in London, my dad was diagnosed. Well, he'd been sick for a while. Not really sick. He had esophageal cancer. So he had a tumor growing in his esophagus, which meant he had trouble eating and swallowing. And he was a kind of a typical, I guess what you could characterize as a typical farmer. He was stubborn and he didn't want to go to the doctors. So he didn't tell the doctors anything. He hadn't been to the doctors, and he was getting slowly worse over a year. And he hadn't even told me and my sister. My mum phoned up one day and said, really worried about your dad. He's not eating. And my dad was a large man. He was, and I wasn't visiting probably as often as I should have done. And so I didn't realise that there was something as seriously wrong as there was. And he left it to the very last minute. I took a leave of absence from work, and I couldn't actually concentrate on what I was doing anymore once I knew that. And so I wasn't doing much good at work anyway. So I took a leave of absence and came back to my mum and dad's place, and was just trying to convince my dad to go to the doctors, basically.
Yeah.
And he eventually did. And they told him he had cancer on his 69th birthday. And he was dead within 5 months.
Wow. So you then spent a number of years learning on the job. You've already mentioned you're agronomist. If you could give your younger self some advice, knowing what you now know, what would it have been?
I think you still don't understand it. You might think you're getting somewhere, but you don't. There's always another layer, another level. Yeah, being cocky like I was, and having been, called into Whitehall to sort out the Olympics or DEFRA or whatever it was.
Yeah, it's only 1,000 acres in Cambridgeshire.
This is just another project.
Easy.
This is just another project. I'll find out what the main problem is. I'll get some recommendations down. We'll do that. It'll all go through. It'll be fine. No way. No. That's not how it worked at all. And pretty soon. So one family has worked with every generation of my family, and they lived on or nearby the farm.
Yep.
And the guy that works for me now, his great grandfather worked with my great grandfather.
Wow.
And the other family who actually live on the farm, it was father and son. They both worked for me, and they'd been there for 20 years. They really knew what to do. My dad had a very different management style. He was very hands-on, quite micromanaging, and liked to be in charge and in control. Whereas even if I'd wanted to be like that, there's no way I would have actually known what I was talking about. So that was to coin a management consultant, quite a culture change. I was asking people what they thought. What do you think we should do here? And they were like, are you trying to trick me? If I say the wrong thing, am I going to get fired? So we have. They're all still with me. So 12 years on, we're all happily. So we found a way through, and I've fallen in love with farming. I fell in love with farming quite quickly.
So that's it for another episode. That's it for another archive episode. I hope you've enjoyed today's delve into the archive. And we'll be doing one more next week before we return to normal episodes again with some new content. But until then, I hope you have a great week ahead. Happy harvesting to everyone who is harvesting and combines are rolling. I'll see you next time.